The Sting of Mortality. Only the lost, the desperate, the foolish, the mad, and the wolves are out during this time of night, the Clove remarked. And what may you be? Inquired the vampire. Chapter 1. The Black Crescent. The silhouette of the black triangle sails soundlessly cut across the bright full moon like an obsidian blade. From the bow of the ship, Lord Moonenthrall's ebony black eyes scanned the terrain below. His tall, spindly, spider-like limbs were tense, and a concerned frown was pressed on his thin, pale lips. The vampire's blue cloak fluttered in the wind as he looked out to the necromancer's remote mountain fortress. No doubt, Alderneth, the human necromancer, was eager to receive his reward for acquiring the staff. Being human was not a mark against Alderneth. In fact, it made things so much easier. For all the necromancer's vast powers, he could not preserve his withering husk forever. At least, not in a form worth preserving. At long last, his investment had finally paid off. Now, the iron staff had finally been found. Long ago, the dragons had been driven away, purged from the mountain, all but one. She was the key. The necromancer raised her from a hatchling, trained her, taught her to obey and do his bidding, to find the staff. And at long last, it had been found. "Can I get you anything to drink, my lord?" inquired a soft, melodious feminine voice from behind him. Moonenthrall turned. He smiled when he saw Crescenta, his lovely underling and assistant, and freshly sired fledgling. Fresh, as in she had been turned within the year. She wore a rich black silk gown and crimson corset, and her ears sparkled with polished blood rubies. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a single, seamless, ornate braid. At his fledgling's side was a young maiden. Her hair was raven black. Her features were fair, yet pale, but not pale because she was a fae or a vampire. No, she was merely human. She was pale from blood loss and lack of sunlight, and likewise the dark shadows under her eyes from lack of sleep. Unlike Crescenta, she was scantily dressed in her best rags, with a crimson little red bow to make her stand out from the rest of the slaves. Despite her condition, she smiled up at Moonenthrall and offered her wrist. Not all humans submitted to their rightful masters, but those who did. Those who served and obeyed their masters were recognized and honored. Well, at least enough to give some hope. Not everything was about fear. Fear was dangerous. Animals were the most dangerous when they were afraid. Better to have them begging on the floor and grateful for the table scraps given to them. The slave girl stole a longing glance over at Crescenta's fine silk gown. Pale, flawless alabaster skin, skin that would never age, immortal for all time, immortal like the stars. While the young girl was a slave, the collar and leash were merely for Crescenta's entertainment. Irene would never run away. She accepted the mark of the black crescent tattooed on her right hand, and pleased her vampire masters any way she could. In fact, if she was left behind, she would most likely traverse over mountain and valley to return to her masters. Not all human slaves were so compliant, and not all were honored to receive the black crescent moon, but the ones who did had proved themselves with loyal and faithful service for many years. Vampires, after all, were not all bad. They needed humans just as much, if not more, than humans needed them. It was not merely a parasitic relationship. No, the vampires protected their preferred food sources from being overrun and destroyed by the roving, vile, orcish hordes on the western steppe, much like a farmer guarding a chicken coop from being spoiled by foxes. Slave girls, like Irene, when they could no longer provide for their vampires adequate nutrition or entertainment, were either left for dead or eventually released. Only the highly favored were turned and given a new name, a vampire name like Crescenta. Irene's smile began to wane beneath Monthral's cold black gaze. Is something wrong, Master? Irene squeaked. Moonthral silently extended his hand, and Crescenta handed over Irene's black silk leash. Once he had control of the leash, he stepped forward and extended his hand, stroking Irene's pale cheek, and examined the frail wrist that had been offered up to him. You have been with us for many years, pet, he remarked softly. Irene beamed up at him as she was guided up to her feet. Faithfully for 4 years, Master, she chimed and sat up on the railing, arching her back, trying to pose for him. It shows, he remarked coldly. Irene's grin stiffened. She wasn't entirely sure if it was a compliment or not. Thank you, she began. You have rings beneath your eyes. Your skin has become pale and pasty, Moonthral clarified. Your services are no longer needed. You may go home when we land. I am setting you free. You have served me well, Irene, he said at last, and unclasped the leash. Irene inhaled sharply. Her black, crescent-tattooed hand shot up over her mouth, gaping in stunned, horrified silence. Moonthral turned to Crescenta. The vampiress stood there, fuming. Now who's going to do my hair? She demanded. We haven't landed yet. If you desire to keep her, then turn her, like I taught you. Moonthral shrugged apathetically. Crescenta leered at her sire and gave an exasperated hand gesture over toward where the slave girl had been sitting. Moonthral briefly glanced back and then paused, suddenly realizing what he was looking for was gone. She was gone. He paused and looked again and listened for the young mortal. He heard only the wind, and then, yes, his keen vampire ears heard the muffled yet distinctive, unmistakable, squishy crunch. It was sort of reminded him of an egg falling onto a hardwood floor. Eggs. The thought of eating human food made him grimace. Such things seemed so unsanitary. What sort of creatures would eat something from a chicken's behind? But then, everything had its place, its own natural order. I was only doing what was best for the poor creature, he sighed. You bastard! She scowled angrily and leaned over the edge of the railing, searching the rocky ravines below for the broken body of her former blood slave. Moonthral did not blink, nor give any sign of remorse. Truly, I had no idea she would jump, he shrugged. If we stop, I might be able to find her in time, and Crescenta began. What? Turn her after a fall from this height? Even if we reached her in time, I doubt she would thank you for it. He sniffed as he turned and fixed his gaze on the secluded fortress on the mountainside coming into view. Crescenta silently accepted the empty leash that was passed back to her. I had liked her, she pouted. I'll get you a new one, Moonthral assured her. His voice grew distant as he saw the vultures circling lazily around the fortress. Something was wrong. The hollow whine of the rusted iron hinges from the heavy wooden gates creaked loudly as they passively flapped back and forth with every strong gust of wind. Go down below, he commanded in a somber but firm voice. But, Crescenta butted. Now, he snarled. He raised his hand, ready to strike her. Crescenta quickly grasped her gown and hurried down below. Sensing his distress, Belladronus, his senior shade, drew near. The only other way for a human without skill or beauty to become a vampire was to become a shade and serve as their lord's instruments of destruction. While their vampire masters gifted them with immortality, the shades themselves received none of the benefits. No eternal youth, no supernatural strength, or quickness, or bodily regeneration. The only being less grotesque than a shade would be an orc covered in leprosy. The gift of long life was not at all worth the curse of perpetual decay. While many in their right mind would never willingly subject themselves to such a wretched, rotting existence, many vain and mad for power and beauty of their sanguine, loving vampire masters fought and begged for the opportunity and privilege to don the black robes and mask to cover their rotting, leprous hides for a chance to possibly one day be whole again and rule the night as a vampire. Until then, they wore long, heavy black cloaks saturated with sweet-smelling cologne, and they hid their grotesque, decaying faces with beautifully polished silver masks. Every 100 years, the vampires and their loyal shades would gather for the sacred blood moon ritual. Traditionally, those shades who had served their masters well would be finally turned from shade to vampire. But until that time, they aged and rotted on their feet, feeling no hunger for food or desire for any earthly pleasure except for fear and pain from their victims. While the majority of the shades simply wore black, a few amongst them had blue sashes indicating that they had served for 10 years or more. The higher-ranking shades, who acted as commanding officers, wore red sashes, as they had been specifically favored and chosen to participate in the next coming blood moon ritual. The polished gold sickle-shaped moon on Belladronna's silver mask set him apart from the rest of the shades. Belladronna's was the vampire's highest in command, and the shade answered solely to Moonthral alone. All others obeyed him. Even Crescenta did not dare question Belladronna's. His word held as much weight as Moonthral himself. He was Moonthral's right hand. "Ease up on the pressure at the bow and level us out," Belladonna's instructed. Immediately the order was passed on, and the crew rushed about the ship, working in perfect tandem with one another, until the ever so slight of a canter was gently leveled out with the horizon. Moonthraw's flying ship used the levitation stones to stay afloat. By themselves, they were merely just worthless rocks. But when under pressure, extreme pressure, they could be used to lift ships into the air. Larger ships, such as Moonthraw's, had 3 chambers that were required to be operated in sync with one another to keep the ship from flying off in awkward angles. The levitation stones are a natural occurring phenomenon that are most times activated from the Earth's tectonic plates pressuring against one another. Large activated composites of these stones have been known to raise entire islands into the sky. Some of these islands have been inhabited by various obscure and secluded peoples, while others have been strip-mined down to nothing in order to keep the great and powerful Phaelion fleet in the air. After the last Great War, the vampires sued for peace and vowed not to rebuild their fleet. In exchange, they were permitted to rule the western kingdoms bordering the steppes. While many vampires honored the treaty, there were some vampires such as Moonthral, who vowed to see his kind once more rise from obscurity and retake the sky from the haughty elves. This, of course, was much easier mumbled in the dark than spoken out loud. Vampires had a very distinct disadvantage in the air compared to the elves. For one, they could not go out in the day without being burnt alive in the horrible sun, and in that day they were sealed in flammable wooden tinderboxes, giving the aerial superiority to the numerous nimble ships of the flying Fey Leon fleet. No, they could not win unless they could turn the tables and pull them down from their lofty perch. "Something troubles you, my lord?" Belladronis asked. "Do you think Alderneth would betray me?" Moonthral asked. Belladronis was silent for several moments before responding in a hoarse, rasping, oozing voice. "It would be strange he would send for us to come, and then to leave the fortress like this, unless he has found a way to gain immortality without being turned." He began and then paused. "Or perhaps someone or something killed him and took it." Once over the fortress walls, 6 shades rappelled down into the courtyard and quickly tied off the flying ship. 3 dozen followed after them to secure the perimeter. Their long, sharp, dual-edged swords gleamed under the moonlight as they rushed in and out of stone buildings. The vultures departed as Moonthral roamed about, inspecting the dozens of dead soldiers' bodies strewn about, mangled and broken and riddled with maggots. "It wasn't orcs or elves," Belladronis pointed out. "Perhaps a dragon. But Alderneth, surely he could not have left the fortress fall to a dragon," remarked. "Dragons," Moonthal corrected him, emphasizing the plural as he pointed out 2 separate tracks. It was then he found Alderneth. His rotting corpse stared up into the sky as he held a broken spear in his chest. "Do you think she did it, Loida?" Belladronis inquired. "I raised her from an egg and gifted her to Alderneth when she was a hatchling to aid his search. Yet I worry she may have," he remarked grimly. "Send the courier pigeon to King Afflegar and all the lords. Tell them to bring down all flying ships, all dragons, anything that flies. Even if it's a Fey ship, bring it down," he commanded. "My lord, a Fey ship that could start a war," Belladronis warned. "The elves know they aren't allowed to patrol these parts. If it is a Fey ship, be sure not to let anyone return. Leave no survivors, and leave no stone unturned." "The staff could be anywhere," he insisted. "And Belladronis," he called. The shade paused. Its faded black shroud swiveled around and turned to its master. "Assign a dozen shades to resume the search here. Perhaps the old codger had the sense to hide it. If not, I dare not delay another second." Up next, Chapter 2, Dragon in the Well. You are listening to The Sting of Mortality by M.R.R. Lopez. And feel free to listen and share it with your friends. The audiobook is free, but if you want to read along or support the channel, then you can find the book on Amazon. And Chapter 2 is on its way currently. The libraries are all shut down due to the emergency, which is absolutely outrageous because libraries are very necessary buildings. Well, at least for me. I have really bad internet, and currently uploading this on my phone is really killing my data, but I know it's for the cause, and I might not be able to stop the coronavirus, but maybe I can give a little bit of comfort and ease some cabin fever out there. Alright. Chapter 2 coming up next.